The howl of the wind through the Sierra Nevada mountains carried with it a sound that made Lucas Tanner's blood run cold, the thin, desperate wail of an infant crying somewhere in the darkness beyond his cabin door. Lucas had been settling in for the night, his bones aching from a long day of hauling timber down from the higher elevations near Downeyville, California, when that sound pierced through the February storm. It was 1878, and winter in the mountains showed no mercy to man nor beast. He grabbed his heavy coat and a lantern, pushing against the cabin door as the wind tried to slam it shut. Snow swirled around him in thick curtains, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. The temperature had dropped well below freezing, and Lucas knew that anyone caught out in this blizzard would be dead within hours. The crying grew louder as he trudged through knee-deep snow, following the sound toward the road that led down to town. His lantern caught something dark against the white landscape. A huddled form collapsed against a boulder that offered minimal shelter from the wind. As he drew closer, his heart lurched. A woman lay there, curled around a bundle of blankets, her body shaking violently. Her lips had taken on a blue tinge, and her dark hair was plastered against her face with snow and ice. "Madam, madam, can you hear me?" Lucas dropped to his knees beside her, setting the lantern down. The bundle in her arms moved, and that infant's cry rang out again, stronger now but still frighteningly weak. The woman's eyes fluttered open, brown eyes glazed with hypothermia and exhaustion. She tried to speak, but her jaw trembled too violently to form words. She clutched the baby tighter as if afraid Lucas might take the child from her. "I'm going to help you," Lucas said firmly, pulling off his coat and wrapping it around both of them. "I've got a cabin just up this way. Can you walk?" She shook her head weakly, and Lucas didn't waste another moment. He scooped her up into his arms, baby and all, grateful for the strength he'd built from years of working the logging camps. She weighed almost nothing, as if she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. The walk back to his cabin felt like miles, though it couldn't have been more than 100 yards. The wind fought him every step, trying to knock him off balance, but Lucas pressed forward with grim determination. Once inside, he kicked the door shut and carried his unexpected guests toward the fireplace, where embers still glowed warmly. He laid the woman down on his own bed, which sat near the hearth, and quickly built up the fire until flames danced high and bright. The baby's cries had weakened to small, pitiful mewls that worried Lucas more than the screaming had. "Stay with me now," he urged the woman, rubbing her hands between his own to restore circulation. "You're safe here. Both of you are safe." He moved to the baby next, carefully unwrapping the layers of cloth to assess the infant's condition. A little girl, he saw, probably no more than 3 or 4 months old, with a round face and wispy dark hair. Her skin felt too cold, her lips pale. Lucas had helped with enough calving seasons to know about warming cold newborns. He grabbed clean cloths from his trunk and warmed them by the fire, then wrapped the baby snugly, holding her against his chest where his body heat could help warm her. The mother watched him through half-closed eyes, still trembling but no longer with that violent shaking that signaled the worst of the cold. Lucas retrieved a blanket and tucked it around her, then set about heating water for tea and broth. He kept the baby against him while he worked, murmuring softly to the little one, "That's it, little miss. You just warm up now. Your mama is going to be just fine, and so are you." It took the better part of an hour before the woman could speak properly. Lucas had gotten some warm broth into both mother and child, and color was finally returning to their faces. The baby had stopped crying and was making small sucking motions with her mouth, clearly hungry for more than broth. "Thank you," the woman whispered, her voice hoarse and scratchy. "Thank you for saving us." "What's your name?" Lucas asked gently, sitting in the chair he'd pulled close to the bed. "And what in God's name were you doing out in that storm?" "Victoria," she said quietly. "Victoria Henderson, and this is my daughter Rose." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, and Lucas realized she couldn't be more than 22 or 23 years old, only a few years younger than his own 27 years. "My husband left us by the side of the road. He said he couldn't afford to feed us anymore, that we were slowing him down. He was heading to Sacramento to find work, and he just left us there." Lucas felt anger surge through him, hot and fierce. What kind of man abandoned his wife and child in a February snowstorm? "How long were you out there?" "Hours, I think. Maybe longer. I lost track of time." Victoria's hand shook as she reached for her baby, and Lucas carefully transferred the warm bundle to her arms. "I tried to keep Rose warm, but I could feel myself getting so tired. I knew if I fell asleep, we'd both die, but I couldn't stay awake anymore." "Well, you're here now, and you're both going to be all right," Lucas said firmly. "You'll stay here as long as you need to. That storm's going to last another day at least, and even when it clears, you're in no condition to travel." Victoria looked at him with those large brown eyes, confusion and hope warring in their depths. "You don't even know me. Why would you help us?" Lucas stood and moved to the stove, giving himself a moment to think about his answer. The truth was complicated. He'd come to this remote cabin in the mountains 3 years ago, after his own life had fallen apart. His parents had died of fever when he was 19, leaving him the family ranch in Texas. He'd worked himself nearly to death trying to keep it going, but drought and debt had eventually forced him to sell. He'd drifted west, working odd jobs, until he'd found himself in the logging camps around Downeyville. The work was hard but honest, and the solitude suited him, or so he'd thought. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply, turning back to face her. "And because no woman and child should be left to die in the snow. Your husband may have forgotten his duty, but that doesn't mean the rest of us have to." Victoria's face crumpled and she began to cry in earnest, great heaving sobs that shook her thin frame. Lucas felt helpless in the face of her grief, but he moved to sit on the edge of the bed and awkwardly patted her shoulder. "Hey now, it's all right. You're safe here." "It's not all right," Victoria choked out between sobs. "I have nothing. No money, no food, nowhere to go. Thomas took everything when he left us. I don't even know where I am." "You're about 5 miles north of Downeyville, up in the high country," Lucas explained. "I work the logging camps when the weather permits, and I keep this cabin year-round. It's not much, but it's warm and dry." "I can't impose on your charity," Victoria said, trying to pull herself together. "As soon as the storm clears, Rose and I will move on." "Move on to where?" Lucas asked gently. "You said yourself you have nothing, and that baby needs care." Victoria looked down at Rose, her expression transforming into something fierce and protective. "I'll find work. I can clean, cook, so someone in town will need help." Lucas doubted that. Downeyville was a rough mining and logging town, still populated mostly by men seeking their fortunes in the Sierra Nevada. The few women who lived there were either married to miners or ran boarding houses. A destitute woman with a baby would find little sympathy and fewer opportunities. "Let's not worry about that tonight," he said instead. "You need rest, and so does Rose. We'll figure out the details when you're stronger." He stood and moved toward his rocking chair by the fire, intending to spend the night there so Victoria could have his bed. But she called out to him, her voice small and afraid. "Mr. Tanner, will you really let us stay? Even for just a few days?" Lucas turned back to look at her, at this young woman who'd been so cruelly abandoned, clutching her baby like the precious treasure she was. Something shifted in his chest. a feeling he hadn't experienced in the 3 years of self-imposed isolation. "I'll be your warmth and your family for as long as you need me to be," he said, the words coming from somewhere deep inside him that he'd thought had gone cold and dead. "I give you my word on that." Victoria's eyes filled with fresh tears, but this time they seemed to be tears of relief rather than despair. "I don't know how to thank you." "Get some rest," Lucas said softly. "That's thanks enough for now." He settled into his chair and pulled a blanket over himself, listening to the wind howl outside and the crackling of the fire. Across the room, he could hear Victoria's breathing slowly evening out as exhaustion finally claimed her. The baby made small noises in her sleep, and Lucas found himself smiling despite the strangeness of the situation. He'd meant what he said. He would be their warmth and their family. He just had no idea how much that promise would come to mean to all of them. The storm raged for 2 more days, dumping several feet of snow across the mountains and making travel impossible. Lucas didn't mind. He spent the time caring for his unexpected guests, preparing meals and keeping the fire burning high. Victoria slowly regained her strength, though she remained painfully thin. She told him more of her story in bits and pieces, painting a picture of a difficult marriage to a man who'd grown increasingly bitter and desperate as his prospects failed. Thomas Henderson had been a farmer's son from Missouri, full of dreams about making his fortune in California. He'd married Victoria when she was just 18, promising her a good life. But nothing had worked out as planned. Every venture failed, every job ended badly, and Thomas had turned his anger and frustration on his young wife. When Victoria had become pregnant, Thomas had seemed pleased at first, but after Rose was born and money grew even tighter, he'd begun to see them as burdens rather than blessings. "He wasn't always cruel," Victoria said one afternoon as she sat by the fire, nursing Rose. Lucas was at the table mending a harness, but he listened carefully. "When we first married, he could be kind, but every disappointment made him harder, colder. By the time Rose was born, I barely recognized him anymore." "A real man doesn't turn on his family when times get tough," Lucas said, his voice harder than he intended. "He protects them, provides for them, no matter what." Victoria looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. "Is that what you would do?" "That's what any decent man would do," Lucas replied. He set down the harness and met her eyes. "I know we're strangers, Victoria, but I want you to understand something. What happened to you wasn't your fault, and you and Rose deserve better than what you got." She looked away, but not before Lucas saw the gratitude and something warmer flash across her face. "You're a good man, Lucas Tanner, better than I had any right to hope for when I was freezing in that snow." "I'm just doing what's right," Lucas said, uncomfortable with the praise. He'd never thought of himself as particularly good. He was just a man who'd learned hard lessons about loss and survival. On the 3rd day, the storm finally broke. Lucas woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through the cabin windows, and a silence that felt almost deafening after days of howling wind. He rose carefully, not wanting to wake Victoria and Rose, who were still sleeping in his bed. Over the past few days, he'd grown accustomed to the sounds of them in his space, the baby's small cries in the night, Victoria's soft singing as she rocked Rose back to sleep, the rustle of blankets and quiet breathing that reminded him he was no longer alone. He prepared coffee and breakfast, and the smell of bacon frying woke Victoria. She emerged from the bed area looking more rested than she had since that first night, though still too thin and fragile for Lucas's liking. Rose was awake too, making small cooing sounds that made Lucas smile. "The storm's passed," Lucas said, pouring coffee for both of them. "Roads will need a day or two to be passable, but the worst is over." Victoria accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping both hands around the warm cup. "Then I suppose, Rose, and I should start thinking about what comes next." Lucas had been thinking about little else for the past 2 days. The practical part of his brain said he should help Victoria get to Downieville, perhaps find her a position as a housekeeper or laundress. But another part of him, a part that surprised him with its intensity, didn't want them to leave at all. "I have a proposition for you," he said carefully, sitting down across from her at the table. "Hear me out before you answer." Victoria nodded, her expression cautious. "This cabin could use a woman's touch," Lucas began. "And the truth is, it gets lonely up here on my own. I work hard during logging season, and it would be good to come home to a hot meal and a clean house. What if you stayed on as my housekeeper? Room and board plus wages when I can afford them. It would give you time to get back on your feet, save some money, figure out your next move." He could see her thinking it over, weighing the offer. "People would talk," she said finally. "An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man." "Let them talk," Lucas said with more confidence than he felt. "We know the truth of it. Besides, we're far enough from town that most folks won't even know you're here, and when they do find out, we'll deal with it." Victoria bit her lip, looking down at Rose sleeping in her arms. "I don't want to be a burden on you." "You wouldn't be. I mean it, having help around here would make my life easier, not harder." Lucas leaned forward, willing her to understand. "And Rose needs stability. She needs a warm home and regular meals. You both do." "Why are you doing this?" Victoria asked, her eyes searching his face. "Really, Lucas, you could have sent us on our way as soon as the storm cleared. Why do you want us to stay?" Lucas took a deep breath, trying to articulate feelings he didn't fully understand himself. 3 years ago, I lost everything that mattered to me. My parents, my home, my sense of purpose. I came up here to these mountains because I thought I wanted to be alone, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just waiting for a reason to care about something again." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw. Victoria's eyes shimmered with tears, but she smiled a real, genuine smile that transformed her tired face into something beautiful. "All right," she said softly. "Rose and I will stay, but I'll earn my keep, Lucas. I won't be a charity case." "Fair enough," Lucas agreed, relief flooding through him. "Then we have a deal." They shook hands on it, and Lucas felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the fire or the coffee. When Victoria's hand lingered in his just a moment longer than necessary, he wondered if she felt it too, that spark of something more than gratitude or simple kindness. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Once the roads cleared enough for travel, Lucas made a trip down to Downieville to stock up on supplies. He returned with flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, salt pork, and several yards of fabric that Victoria could use to make new clothes for herself and Rose. He also brought back a small wooden cradle he'd purchased from a furniture maker, ignoring the man's curious questions about why a bachelor would need such a thing. Victoria proved to be as good as her word. She cleaned the cabin until it shone, organized Lucas's chaotic collection of tools and supplies, and prepared meals that reminded him of his mother's cooking. She had a talent for making even the simplest ingredients taste wonderful, and Lucas found himself actually looking forward to coming home each evening after a day of work in the timber camps. But more than the practical benefits, Lucas discovered he genuinely enjoyed Victoria's company. She was intelligent and curious, asking him questions about the logging work and the mountains. She had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh. And she was devoted to Rose in a way that touched something deep in Lucas's heart. He found himself growing attached to the baby as well. Rose was starting to develop a personality, smiling and cooing when Lucas talked to her. He'd hold her in the evenings while Victoria prepared supper, bouncing her gently on his knee and making silly faces that sent her into peals of delighted laughter. Those moments felt sacred somehow, as if the three of them were creating something precious and fragile that needed to be protected. One evening in late March, after they'd finished supper and Lucas was holding Rose while Victoria washed dishes, she turned to him with a serious expression. "Lucas, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "All right," Lucas said, adjusting Rose in his arms as she grabbed at his beard with her tiny fists. "Why have you never married? A man like you, hardworking, kind, with your own place, I'd think women would be lining up." Lucas felt his cheeks warm. "I guess I never found the right woman. After I lost the ranch, I felt like I didn't have anything to offer. A woman deserves a man who can provide properly, give her security. I didn't feel like that man anymore." Victoria dried her hands and came to sit beside him on the bench. "That's foolish," she said gently. "A woman doesn't just want financial security. She wants a man who treats her with respect, who keeps his promises, who cares about her well-being. You have all those qualities, Lucas. Thomas had prospects when I married him, but he didn't have character. I'd trade prospects for character any day." Their eyes met, and Lucas felt his pulse quicken. There was something in Victoria's gaze that made his breath catch. Over the past weeks, he'd been trying to ignore the growing attraction he felt toward her. She was vulnerable, recovering from trauma and betrayal. The last thing she needed was him complicating matters with inappropriate feelings. But in this moment, seeing the warmth and admiration in her eyes, he wondered if maybe his feelings weren't entirely one-sided. "Victoria," he began, not sure what he wanted to say. But Rose chose that moment to let out a loud burp, breaking the tension and making them both laugh. The baby looked tremendously pleased with herself, and Lucas couldn't help but grin at her. "She has impeccable timing," Victoria said, shaking her head with amusement. She reached out and gently took Rose from Lucas's arms. "I should put her down for the night." Lucas watched as Victoria carried Rose to the cradle he'd positioned near the bed. She sang softly as she settled the baby down, a lullaby in a language Lucas didn't recognize. When he asked about it later, Victoria explained that her grandmother had been from Norway and had taught her the old songs. "Sing it again," Lucas requested, and Victoria did, her voice soft and melodic in the firelight. Lucas closed his eyes and let the foreign words wash over him, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years. That night, lying in his bedroll by the fire while Victoria slept in the bed with Rose nearby in her cradle, Lucas admitted to himself what he'd been trying to deny. He was falling in love with Victoria Henderson. It wasn't just attraction, though he certainly found her beautiful with her dark hair and expressive eyes. It was everything about her: her strength in the face of hardship, her devotion to her daughter, her gentle humor and quiet grace. She'd brought light into his lonely existence, and he couldn't imagine going back to the way things were before. But what could he offer her? He was a logger living in a remote cabin, barely scraping by most months. She deserved someone who could give her more than this rough existence. And yet, the memory of her words earlier that evening gave him hope. Maybe, just maybe, what he could offer was enough. Spring arrived in full force, bringing warmer weather and the melting of the high snow. The mountains transformed into a riot of wildflowers and new green growth. Lucas's work in the logging camps picked up, and he was gone for longer hours each day. He always hurried home, though, eager to see Victoria and Rose. One afternoon in April, he returned to find Victoria in a state of distress. Rose was crying inconsolably, her face red and her little body hot to the touch. "She's been like this for hours," Victoria said, her voice tight with worry. "I've tried everything, but nothing helps. Lucas, I think she's really sick." Lucas examined the baby carefully. Rose's forehead felt far too warm, and her crying had a quality to it that worried him. "We need to get her to a doctor. There's one in Downieville, Dr. Walsh. He's a good man." "But that's hours away," Victoria protested, "and we don't have a wagon or horses." "I'll carry her," Lucas said firmly. "Bundle her up warm and pack anything you think she might need. We're leaving now." Victoria didn't argue. Within 15 minutes, they were heading down the mountain trail toward Downieville. Lucas carried Rose while Victoria hurried along beside him, her face pale with fear. The baby's crying had weakened to small whimpers, which worried Lucas even more than the screaming. "She's going to be all right," he said, as much to reassure himself as Victoria. "We'll get her to the doctor, and he'll know what to do." The journey down the mountain had never felt so long. Lucas pushed himself to move as quickly as possible without jostling the baby too much. His arms ached, but he didn't slow down. Beside him, Victoria was nearly running to keep up, her breathing labored but determined. They reached Downieville as the sun was setting. The town was bustling with evening activity, miners and loggers heading to the saloons, women closing up shop, children playing their last games before bedtime. Lucas headed straight for Dr. Walsh's office, which was attached to his home on the north end of town. Dr. Walsh was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and steady hands. He took Rose from Lucas and examined her carefully while Victoria hovered nearby, wringing her hands. "It's a fever, likely from teething," the doctor pronounced after several tense minutes. "See here, her gums are swollen and red. It's painful and can cause a high fever in infants. She'll need cool compresses to bring the fever down, and I'll give you some willow bark tea that should help with the pain." Victoria nearly collapsed with relief. "She's going to be all right. She should be fine," Dr. Walsh assured her. "Keep her cool, give her the tea, and the fever should break within a day or two. If it doesn't, bring her back to me." Lucas paid the doctor from his carefully hoarded savings, and they made their way to the boarding house where Lucas usually stayed when business kept him in town overnight. Mrs. Patterson, the proprietor, took one look at Victoria and Rose and immediately softened. "Poor dear," she clucked, ushering them inside. "You look exhausted. I'll prepare my best room for you." That night, Lucas and Victoria took turns applying cool compresses to Rose's forehead and getting small amounts of the medicinal tea into her. The baby finally fell into a restless sleep near midnight, and Victoria slumped against the headboard, exhausted. "You should rest," Lucas said gently. He was sitting in a chair beside the bed, his eyes gritty with fatigue but unwilling to leave them. "I was so scared," Victoria whispered. "When she was crying like that and I couldn't help her, I felt so helpless. What if something had happened to her? What if we'd been too late?" "But we weren't," Lucas said firmly. He reached out and took Victoria's hand, squeezing gently. "She's going to be fine, Victoria, and you're a wonderful mother. Rose is lucky to have you." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I'm lucky to have you, Lucas. If you hadn't been there tonight, if you hadn't known what to do, I don't know what would have happened." "I'll always be there," Lucas said, the words coming out more intense than he'd intended. "For both of you. I meant what I said that first night. I'll be your warmth and your family." Victoria looked at him for a long moment, and then, slowly, she leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "You already are," she whispered. Lucas felt that kiss burn through him like fire. He turned his head slightly, bringing their faces close together. Victoria didn't pull away. Her eyes searched his, and Lucas saw his own feelings reflected back at him: fear, hope, longing, and something deeper that made his heart race. "Victoria," he breathed, and then he was kissing her properly, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Her lips were soft and warm beneath his, and she kissed him back with a tenderness that made his chest ache. It was gentle and sweet and filled with promise, When they finally broke apart, Victoria was smiling despite the tears on her cheeks. "I've wanted you to do that for weeks," she admitted. "I didn't think I had the right," Lucas confessed. "You've been through so much and I didn't want to take advantage." "You could never take advantage," Victoria said firmly. "Lucas, you saved my life and my daughter's life. But more than that, you've given us a home and shown us what it means to be truly cared for. I'm falling in love with you, and I think I have been since that very first night." Lucas felt joy surge through him, so intense it was almost painful. "I love you too," he said, the words feeling both terrifying and absolutely right. "I love you and Rose, and I want you both in my life. Not as my housekeeper, Victoria, as my family, as my wife." Victoria's eyes widened. "Lucas, are you asking me to marry you?" "I am," Lucas said, suddenly nervous. "I know I don't have much to offer, just a cabin in the mountains and a logger's wages. But I can promise you that I'll work hard every day to provide for you and Rose. I'll protect you, care for you, and love you for the rest of my life." "That's what I can offer, Victoria. Is it enough?" Victoria was crying openly now, but her smile was radiant. "It's more than enough. It's everything. Yes, Lucas. Yes, I'll marry you." Lucas kissed her again, deeper this time, pouring all his love and promise into it. When they broke apart, Rose stirred in her sleep, making small noises. They both looked at her, this tiny person who had brought them together, and Lucas felt his heart overflow with love for both of them. "We'll do this right," he said softly. "Tomorrow, when Rose is better, we'll find the preacher and get married proper. I want everyone to know you're my wife, that Rose is my daughter in every way that matters. She'll need a father," Victoria said quietly. "Thomas abandoned her, but you. Lucas, are you sure you want to take on another man's child?" Lucas looked at the sleeping baby, remembering how he'd held her against his chest that first night, warming her with his own body heat. He thought of all the evenings since then, bouncing her on his knee and making her laugh. He couldn't imagine his life without her anymore. "She's mine," he said simply. "The moment I pulled you both out of that snow, she became mine. Biology doesn't make a father, Victoria. Love does. And I love that little girl like she came from my own blood." Victoria buried her face against his shoulder, sobbing with relief and happiness. Lucas held her close, stroking her hair and murmuring soft reassurances. They stayed like that until Victoria's tears subsided and exhaustion finally claimed her. Lucas settled her beside Rose in the bed and took up his vigil in the chair, watching over the two people who had become his entire world. By morning, Rose's fever had broken. She woke up fussy but clearly feeling better, and Victoria nearly wept with relief all over again. They spent another day in Downieville, making sure the baby had fully recovered, and Lucas used that time to make arrangements. He found Reverend Matthews at the small church on the edge of town and explained the situation. The Reverend, a pragmatic man who'd seen his share of unusual circumstances in a frontier town, agreed to perform the ceremony that very afternoon. "You have a ring?" Victoria asked as they prepared for the wedding. She was wearing the nicest dress she owned, which Lucas had had laundered by Mrs. Patterson. It was simple cotton, faded from wear, but Victoria looked beautiful in it. Lucas felt his face fall. "I didn't even think of that." "Victoria, I'm sorry, don't be," she interrupted, smiling. "We don't need rings to make this real, we just need each other." But Lucas wanted to give her something, some symbol of his commitment. He stepped outside the boarding house and stood on the street, thinking hard. His eyes fell on the general store across the way, and inspiration struck. He hurried inside and emerged 10 minutes later with a small wrapped package. When he returned to Victoria, he handed it to her. "It's not a ring, but I wanted you to have something." Victoria unwrapped the package to reveal a delicate silver locket on a chain. Her eyes filled with tears as she opened it to reveal two small spaces for photographs or locks of hair. "We can put a piece of Rose's hair in one side," Lucas explained. "And maybe someday, if we're blessed with more children, we can add them too. It's not traditional, but I wanted you to have something to remember this day." "It's perfect," Victoria whispered. She stood on her toes and kissed him softly. "Help me put it on." Lucas fastened the locket around her neck with trembling fingers, marveling at how right this all felt. A few months ago, he'd been alone in his cabin, convinced he'd spend the rest of his life in solitude. Now he was about to marry a woman he loved and become a father to her daughter. Life had a strange way of working out. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Reverend Matthews spoke about the sanctity of marriage and the responsibilities they were undertaking. When it came time for vows, Lucas spoke from his heart. "Victoria, I promise to love you and Rose for all my days. I promise to be a faithful husband and a good father. I promise to work hard to provide for our family and to always treat you with the respect and care you deserve. You and Rose are my family now, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know how much you mean to me." Victoria's vows were equally heartfelt. "Lucas, you saved my life and gave me hope when I had none. You've shown me what real love and commitment look like. I promise to be a faithful wife, to support you in all things, and to build a good life with you. You are the best man I've ever known, and I'm honored to be your wife." When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed Victoria with all the love in his heart. Rose, held by Mrs. Patterson, who'd agreed to witness the ceremony, let out a happy gurgle as if celebrating along with them. After the ceremony, Mrs. Patterson insisted on hosting a small celebration dinner. She'd prepared a feast of roasted chicken, fresh bread, spring vegetables, and even a small cake. Several of Lucas's friends from the logging camps had caught wind of the wedding and showed up to offer congratulations and good-natured ribbing. "Never thought we'd see the day Lucas Tanner got hitched," one logger named Jim said, clapping Lucas on the back. "But I'm happy for you, friend. She's a good woman, anyone can see that." "Thank you," Lucas said sincerely. He looked across the room to where Victoria sat with Rose, talking and laughing with Mrs. Patterson and the other women who'd come to celebrate. His wife. The word still felt surreal but wonderful. As the evening wore on and the celebration wound down, Lucas and Victoria made their way back to their room at the boarding house. Rose was already asleep in Victoria's arms, exhausted from all the excitement. They tucked her into the small cradle Mrs. Patterson had provided, and then Lucas and Victoria were finally alone. "Hello, husband," Victoria said softly, a shy smile on her face. "Hello, wife," Lucas replied, pulling her into his arms. He kissed her gently at first, then with growing passion as Victoria responded eagerly. They'd been living together for weeks, but there had always been an unspoken boundary between them. Now, as husband and wife, that boundary was gone. Lucas was gentle with Victoria, mindful that her experiences with intimacy had been with a man who'd proven himself cruel and selfish. But Victoria responded to his touch with a passion that surprised them both, and when they finally came together, it felt like the natural completion of everything they'd been building together over the past months. Afterward, they lay tangled in each other's arms, listening to Rose's soft breathing from the cradle nearby. Lucas stroked Victoria's hair, feeling more content than he'd ever thought possible. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. Victoria tilted her head up to look at him, her eyes shining in the lamplight. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be. Lucas, you've given me everything: safety, love, a future. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift." "You already are," Lucas assured her. "Just by being you, by being here with me. That's all I'll ever need." They stayed in Downieville for another day, allowing Rose to fully recover and giving themselves time to adjust to their new status as husband and wife. Lucas made arrangements with the logging company to adjust his work schedule, so he'd be home more often. He also purchased supplies for the cabin and several gifts for Victoria: new fabric for dresses, a proper cooking pot to replace his battered old one, and a rocking chair for her to use when nursing Rose or simply resting by the fire. When they finally made the journey back up the mountain to the cabin, Lucas insisted on carrying both Rose and most of their supplies. Victoria walked beside him, her hand occasionally brushing against his arm, a small smile playing on her lips. "Are you excited to go home, Mrs. Tanner?" Lucas asked, loving the way her new name sounded. "I am," Victoria replied, "though I think I'd be happy anywhere as long as I was with you and Rose." The cabin looked welcoming as they approached, smoke already rising from the chimney. Lucas had paid one of the camp boys to come up and get the fire going before their return. Inside, everything was as they'd left it, but somehow it felt different now. This wasn't just a place where Victoria worked as a housekeeper, this was their home, the place where they'd build their life together. Over the next few weeks, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Lucas continued his work in the logging camps, but he made a point of coming home every evening, no matter how tired he was. Victoria transformed the cabin bit by bit, adding small touches that made it feel more like a real home: curtains for the windows, wildflowers in jars on the table, her grandmother's quilt on their bed. Rose thrived in the stable, loving environment. She grew stronger and more alert each day, reaching for Lucas whenever he came home and dissolving into giggles when he played with her. Lucas had never imagined himself as a father, but he took to the role naturally. He was patient and gentle with Rose, treating her with the same care and devotion he showed Victoria. One evening in early May, as they sat together after supper with Rose playing on a blanket on the floor, Victoria brought up something that had been on her mind. "Lucas, I've been thinking about Rose's future," she began. "About making sure she has opportunities, that she can go to school and maybe even beyond that." "I've been thinking about that too," Lucas admitted. "The money I make logging is enough to get by on, but it's not much for saving. I've been considering taking on additional work, maybe doing some hunting and trapping during the winter months when the logging slows down. Or," Victoria said carefully, "we could think about moving closer to town eventually, somewhere with better access to schools and other opportunities." Lucas considered this. He'd grown attached to his remote cabin, to the solitude and peace of the mountains, but he'd grown more attached to his family and their needs. "If that's what's best for Rose, then that's what we'll do," he said firmly, "though maybe not right away. Let's give ourselves time to save money, to plan properly, and in the meantime we can teach Rose ourselves. You're educated, Victoria. You can teach her to read and write." Victoria smiled, relief evident on her face. "I'd like that. My mother always said that education was the greatest gift you could give a child, especially a girl. I want Rose to have choices in life, Lucas. I don't want her to ever feel trapped the way I did." Lucas reached out and took Victoria's hand. "She'll have choices. We'll make sure of that. And she'll grow up knowing she's loved and valued, not just for what she can do, but for who she is." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Rose attempt to grab her own toes and gurgling with satisfaction when she succeeded. Lucas felt a surge of protective love so strong it almost hurt. This was his daughter in every way that mattered, and he'd move heaven and earth to give her the best life possible. Summer arrived in full glory, bringing long days and warm nights. Lucas's work kept him busy, but he and Victoria managed to carve out time for themselves. On Sundays, his one day off, they'd pack a lunch and hike to one of the nearby meadows where Rose could play on a blanket while they relaxed in the sunshine. Those days felt sacred to Lucas, a chance to simply be together without the demands of work or chores. It was on one such Sunday in July that Victoria shared news that filled Lucas with joy and a touch of fear. They were sitting by a small creek, Rose napping in the shade of a pine tree, when Victoria turned to Lucas with a serious expression. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice nervous. Lucas's stomach clenched. Had he done something wrong? Was she unhappy? "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Victoria took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "I'm going to have a baby, Lucas, our baby." Lucas felt his eyes widen, his heart beginning to race. "You're pregnant, are you sure?" "I'm sure," Victoria said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I haven't had my monthly courses in 2 months, and I've been feeling sick in the mornings." "Lucas, are you happy?" "I know we haven't been married long and money is tight," but Lucas cut off her worried rambling by kissing her thoroughly. When he pulled back, he was grinning so wide his face hurt. "Happy, Victoria, I'm beyond happy. I'm thrilled. We're going to have a baby." Victoria's tears spilled over, but she was smiling. "I was so worried you'd think it was too soon or that we couldn't afford it." "We'll manage," Lucas said firmly. "We always do. And Rose is going to have a little brother or sister. That's wonderful." He pulled Victoria close, holding her against his chest and feeling the steady beat of her heart. A baby. Their baby. A child who would be part of both of them, a living symbol of their love. The thought filled him with wonder and a fierce determination to provide for his growing family. That night, as they lay in bed with Rose sleeping soundly in her cradle, Lucas rested his hand on Victoria's still flat stomach and tried to imagine the life growing there. "I love you," he whispered. "You, Rose, and this little one. My family. You're everything to me, Victoria." "And you're everything to us," Victoria whispered back. "I never thought I could be this happy, Lucas. I never thought I'd find someone who could love me and Rose the way you do." "I'll love you both until my dying day," Lucas promised. "And all the children we're blessed with. We're going to build a good life, Victoria. I swear it." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the hot summer months. Victoria glowed with health, her figure gradually rounding as the baby grew. Lucas was attentive and protective, insisting she rest more and take on fewer chores. Victoria tolerated his fussing with good-natured amusement, though she drew the line when he suggested she stay in bed all day. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she told him firmly. "Women have been having babies and working up until the last moment since the dawn of time." "I'm fine, Lucas." "I just want to take care of you," Lucas protested. "I know, and I love you for it," Victoria said, softening. "But the best way to take care of me is to let me live normally. I'll let you know if I need to rest more, I promise." Lucas had to content himself with that, though he still worried constantly. The memory of how fragile Victoria had looked that first night, nearly frozen in the snow, haunted him. He couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to her or the baby. In late August, Victoria surprised him by suggesting they host a small gathering to celebrate their marriage properly. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned it when we were in town last week," she explained. "She said it's traditional to have a celebration for newlyweds, and people have been asking about us. I think it would be good to get to know our neighbors better." Lucas wasn't naturally social, but he could see the wisdom in Victoria's suggestion. If they were going to build a life in this area, having good relationships with the community would be important. So they spent several days preparing, cleaning the cabin and the yard, and cooking food for what turned out to be more guests than they'd anticipated. Loggers from the camps came, along with their families. Folks from town made the journey up the mountain. Mrs. Patterson arrived with enough food to feed an army. Even Dr. Walsh came, bringing a small gift for Rose and congratulating Lucas on his marriage. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing in the clearing in front of the cabin. Lucas watched Victoria laugh and chat with the other women, Rose balanced on her hip and her free hand resting protectively on her rounded stomach. He felt a fierce pride that this woman was his wife, that she'd chosen him. Jim, his friend from the logging camp, came to stand beside him. "You're a lucky man, Lucas." "Don't I know it?" Lucas agreed. "She's good for you," Jim continued. "You seem different than you did before, lighter somehow. Like you're not carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders anymore." Lucas thought about that. Jim was right. The loneliness and bitterness that had dogged him for years had lifted. He had purpose again, people to live for and work for. "She saved me as much as I saved her," he said quietly. The party wound down as darkness fell and guests began the journey back to town, or to their own homes. Victoria looked tired but happy as she waved goodbye to the last stragglers. Lucas put Rose to bed and then returned to find Victoria sitting in her rocking chair, hands on her stomach and a contented smile on her face. "That was nice," she said. "I like having friends, being part of a community again." "Me too," Lucas admitted, "though I'm glad it's just us again now." "I like having you to myself." Victoria laughed. "Come here, husband." Lucas went to her and she pulled him down for a kiss. "Thank you for today, for agreeing to the party, and thank you for giving me and Rose this life. I fall more in love with you every day, Lucas Tanner." "The feeling is entirely mutual, Mrs. Tanner," Lucas murmured against her lips. Autumn arrived with its spectacular display of color. The aspens turned gold, the maples blazed red and orange, and the air took on a crisp quality that made breathing feel like a luxury. Victoria's pregnancy was progressing well, her belly now noticeably round. Dr. Walsh had examined her during their last trip to town and pronounced both mother and baby healthy. The baby should come in late January or early February, he told them. "Make sure you can get to town when the time comes, or have a midwife come to you. Childbirth can be unpredictable, especially in winter." Lucas took the doctor's advice seriously. He made arrangements with Mrs. Patterson, who had experience as a midwife, to come to the cabin when Victoria's time arrived. He also stockpiled supplies and made sure they had everything they might need: clean linens, hot water, medicines, and anything else Dr. Walsh suggested. Rose celebrated her first birthday in October, though none of them knew the exact date of her birth. Victoria had chosen a date near when she thought Rose had been born, and they marked it with a small cake and gifts. Lucas had made a wooden rattle and a little carved horse that Rose immediately tried to eat. "She's grown so much," Victoria said, watching Rose toddle around the cabin on unsteady legs. "I can hardly believe she's the same tiny baby you found in the snow." "She's thriving," Lucas agreed. "You're a wonderful mother, Victoria." "We're wonderful parents," Victoria corrected. "Rose loves you, Lucas. You should see the way her face lights up when she hears you coming home each day." Lucas felt his chest swell with pride and love. Rose had started calling him Papa a few weeks ago, her first real word, and it had nearly brought him to tears. He loved that little girl with his whole heart. As winter approached, Lucas became increasingly protective of his family. He checked and rechecked their supplies, made sure the cabin was sealed against drafts, and cut enough firewood to last them through the coldest months. Victoria teased him gently about his preparations, but he could see the gratitude in her eyes. "I'm not taking any chances," he told her. "Not with you and the babies. If we get snowed in for weeks, I want to make sure we have everything we need." Christmas came, and Lucas surprised Victoria with gifts he'd been secretly working on for months. He'd carved a beautiful cradle for the new baby, complete with delicate decorative details. He'd also commissioned a dress for Victoria from one of the seamstresses in town, made of soft blue fabric that matched her eyes. Victoria gave him a warm winter coat she'd sewn herself, working on it in secret during the hours when he was at the logging camps. "Your old one was falling apart," she said as he tried it on. "I wanted you to have something that would keep you warm." They spent Christmas Day inside, playing with Rose and enjoying a special meal Victoria had prepared. Snow fell gently outside, blanketing everything in white. Lucas held Victoria close and thought about how different this Christmas was from the last one, when he'd been alone and lonely. Now he had everything he'd never known he wanted. January arrived with bitter cold and heavy snows. Lucas worked shorter days at the camps, unwilling to be far from home with Victoria's due date approaching. One evening in late January, as they were finishing supper, Victoria suddenly gasped and pressed a hand to her stomach. "What is it?" Lucas was on his feet immediately, his heart pounding. "I think it's time," Victoria said, her voice tight. "The baby's coming, Lucas." Lucas felt panic surge through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He'd prepared for this. He knew what to do. "All right, let me get the fire built up and water heating. Then I'll ride down to town and fetch Mrs. Patterson." But Victoria shook her head. "There's no time for that. This baby is coming fast, Lucas. You're going to have to help me." Lucas felt the blood drain from his face. "Victoria, I don't know how to deliver a baby." "You've helped with calving, haven't you?" Victoria asked, trying to smile despite the pain. "It's not that different. Besides, you don't have a choice. This baby isn't waiting." Lucas swallowed hard and nodded. He'd faced down grizzly bears and survived snowstorms. He could do this. He had to do this for Victoria and their baby. He helped Victoria to the bed and began gathering the supplies Dr. Walsh had told him to prepare. His hands shook as he worked, but Victoria's steady voice guided him. Rose, sensing something was happening, began to fuss in her cradle. Lucas quickly moved her to a safe spot with some toys to occupy her, then returned to Victoria's side. The next few hours were the most terrifying of Lucas's life. Victoria labored bravely, biting back cries of pain that made Lucas's heart twist. He held her hand, wiped her forehead with cool cloths, and tried to remember everything Dr. Walsh had said about the process of birth. When the moment finally came for the baby to be born, Lucas was there to catch the tiny, slippery form that emerged with a lusty cry. "It's a boy," Lucas said, his voice choked with emotion. "Victoria, we have a son." He quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped him in soft blankets, then placed the squalling infant in Victoria's waiting arms. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at their son, perfect and healthy and beautiful. "He's perfect," she whispered. "Lucas, you did so well. Look at him. Look at our boy." Lucas collapsed into the chair beside the bed, his whole body shaking with relief and exhaustion and overwhelming love. His son. He and Victoria had created this little person, this perfect combination of both of them. The baby had Victoria's dark hair and what looked like Lucas's nose. His tiny fists waved in the air as he cried, and Lucas thought he'd never heard a more wonderful sound. "What should we name him?" Victoria asked, looking up at Lucas with shining eyes. They discussed names over the past months but hadn't settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Lucas thought about the new beginning this child represented, a fresh start for all of them. "What about James?" Lucas suggested. "James Tanner. We could call him Jamie when he's small." "James," Victoria repeated, testing it out. "I like it. Jamie. Welcome to the world, Jamie Tanner. The baby, as if understanding his mother's words, stopped crying and blinked up at them with unfocused eyes. Lucas reached out and gently touched his son's tiny hand, marveling when those miniature fingers wrapped around his one finger and held tight. "Hello, son," Lucas whispered. "I'm your papa, and I promise I'm going to take good care of you. You and your mama and your sister. You're going to have a good life, Jamie. The best life I can give you." Over the next few days, as Victoria recovered from the birth and they all adjusted to having a newborn in the house, Lucas felt his love for his family deepen even further. Rose was curious about her new brother, wanting to touch him gently and bringing him her toys. Victoria glowed with happiness despite her exhaustion. And little Jamie proved to be a relatively easy baby, sleeping and eating well. Lucas sent word to town about the baby's arrival, and Mrs. Patterson made the journey up the mountain as soon as the weather permitted. She examined both Victoria and Jamie, pronounced them both healthy, and scolded Lucas good-naturedly for not fetching her. "Though from what Victoria tells me, you did a fine job delivering this little one," she admitted. "Not many men could handle that without fainting dead away." "I was too scared to faint," Lucas said honestly. "All I could think was that Victoria and the baby needed me to keep my head." When Mrs. Patterson left, she took with her letters Lucas had written to his former neighbors in Texas, sharing the news of his marriage and his growing family. He'd kept in touch sporadically over the years, and he wanted them to know that the lost young man who'd sold his parents' ranch and drifted west had found his way again. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The snow melted, revealing new growth beneath. Jamie grew stronger every day, and Rose adapted to being a big sister with aplomb. Victoria regained her strength and energy, and the cabin rang with the sounds of children's laughter and family life. One evening in April, as they sat together after the children were asleep, Victoria turned to Lucas with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," she said, "about our future, about what we want for this family." "What do you have in mind?" Lucas asked, curious. "I want us to buy land," Victoria said. "Not just this cabin on your employer's property, but our own place. Somewhere we can build a real home, maybe start a small ranch. Nothing huge, just enough to support ourselves and give the children room to grow." Lucas felt excitement stir in his chest. He'd been having similar thoughts, though he hadn't voiced them. "I've been saving money," he admitted. "Every penny I can spare. I've got enough that we could start looking, maybe find something affordable." Victoria's face lit up. "Really, Lucas, we could do this. We could have our own place." "I think we could," Lucas said, pulling her close. "It would take a lot of work, and we'd have to be smart about what we could afford. But yes, Victoria, I think we could make it happen." They spent the next several weeks researching available land in the area. Lucas talked to people in town, consulted with the land office, and investigated their options. Finally, they founded a 50-acre parcel about halfway between Lucas's current cabin and Downeyville. It had a small creek running through it, good timber, and a meadow perfect for grazing animals. The price was high but not unreasonable, and the current owner was willing to negotiate terms. Lucas and Victoria walked the land together on a warm May afternoon, with Rose toddling between them, and Jamie strapped to Victoria's back in a carrier Lucas had fashioned. They stood on a slight rise that offered a view of the surrounding mountains, and Lucas could picture it: a house here, a barn there, fields for crops and pasture for livestock. "This is it," Victoria said softly. "This is where we should build our life, Lucas. Can't you feel it?" Lucas could feel it. This place had a rightness to it, a sense of possibility and promise. "Let's do it," he said, decision made. "Let's buy this land and make it ours." The negotiations took several weeks, but finally, in June of 1879, Lucas and Victoria Tanner became the proud owners of 50 acres of California mountain land. They celebrated with Jim and some of Lucas's other friends from the logging camps. And that night, alone with Victoria and the children, Lucas felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything he'd experienced since losing his parents' ranch years ago. "We did it," he said, holding Victoria close. "We have our own land, our own future." "We did it together," Victoria corrected. "Everything we have, Lucas, we built together. You and me and our love for each other and these children. Building their new home became the focus of the next year." Lucas continued his work at the logging camps to bring in money, but every spare moment was devoted to construction. He enlisted the help of friends who knew carpentry and stonework, bartering his own labor in exchange for theirs. Victoria worked alongside him when she could, cooking meals for the workers and helping with the finish work inside the house. By autumn of 1879, they had a house not large, but sturdy and well-built, with 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a large main room with a stone fireplace. They moved in on a crisp October day, and Victoria cried happy tears as she walked through their new home. "It's perfect," she said, spinning slowly to take it all in. "Lucas, you built this for us. You gave us this. We gave us this," Lucas insisted. "Your strength and love made all of this possible, Victoria. I was a broken man when I found you in that snow. You put me back together and gave me a reason to build again." Rose ran through the house, delighted by the space and the novelty of it all. Jamie, now 9 months old and crawling everywhere, explored the new environment with intense curiosity. Lucas watched his family claim this space, making it theirs, and felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. Over the next few years, the Tanner family prospered. Lucas continued logging but also started a small horse breeding operation, using skills he'd learned growing up in Texas. Victoria tended a large garden and took in sewing work from people in town, adding to their income. Rose grew into a bright, energetic little girl who loved books and learning. Jamie proved to be fearless and adventurous, keeping his parents constantly on their toes. In 1881, Victoria gave birth to their 3rd child, a daughter they named Lily. She had Victoria's delicate features and Lucas's lighter coloring, and both her siblings doted on her. Rose, now 4 years old, took her role as big sister seriously, helping Victoria care for the baby and entertaining her with songs and stories. Lucas watched his family grow with wonder and gratitude. Sometimes, especially on cold winter nights, he'd think back to that February evening in 1878 when he'd heard a baby crying in the snow. That moment had changed everything, taking him from lonely isolation to this rich, full life surrounded by love. One evening in late 1882, after the children were all in bed, Lucas and Victoria sat together by the fireplace in their home. Outside, snow was falling again, just as it had been that night 4 years ago when their story began. But now they were warm and safe, with a solid roof over their heads and their children sleeping peacefully nearby. "Do you ever think about that night?" Lucas asked softly, his arm around Victoria's shoulders. "All the time," Victoria admitted. "It was the worst moment of my life and the best moment, all at once. The worst because I thought Rose and I were going to die, the best because it brought me to you." "I meant what I said that night," Lucas told her, turning so he could look into her eyes. "I said I'd be your warmth and your family, and I meant it. But Victoria, you've given me so much more than I ever gave you. You gave me back my life, my purpose, my heart." Victoria smiled, reaching up to touch his face tenderly. "We saved each other, Lucas. That's the truth of it. You pulled me from the snow, but I pulled you from loneliness. We built this life together through love and hard work and faith in each other. I love you, Lucas said, kissing her softly. I'll love you until my dying day and beyond. And I love you, Victoria replied. My husband, my partner, my home. They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the crackle of the fire and the soft sounds of their children sleeping. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing their land in white. But inside the Tanner home, all was warm and bright and full of love. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and joys. In 1884, Victoria gave birth to twin boys, Matthew and Mark, who proved to be as mischievous as they were adorable. The house that had seemed spacious now felt crowded with 5 children under the age of 6, but Lucas and Victoria wouldn't have had it any other way. Rose started attending the school in Downieville when she turned 7, making the journey down the mountain each day with Lucas when he went to work. She proved to be an excellent student, confirming Victoria's belief in the importance of education. Jamie chafed at having to wait until he was old enough to join his sister, spending his days helping Victoria around the property and pestering Lucas to teach him everything about horses and ranching. The horse breeding operation expanded as Lucas developed a reputation for quality animals. He specialized in sturdy mountain horses that could handle the tough terrain, and miners and loggers from all over the region came to buy from him. The income allowed them to improve their property further, adding a proper barn, chicken coop, and even a small bunkhouse for the occasional hired hand. Victoria's sewing business also grew. She developed a particular skill for wedding dresses and formal gowns, and women from as far away as Sacramento would sometimes make the journey to commission pieces from her. She taught Rose the basics of sewing, passing down skills her own mother had taught her. In 1887, when Rose was 9 and Jamie was 8, Thomas Henderson unexpectedly reappeared in their lives. He showed up at the ranch one afternoon in early summer, looking weathered and desperate. Lucas was in the barn when he heard the commotion Victoria's raised voice, sharp with anger and fear. He strode quickly to the house to find Thomas standing in their yard, his hat in his hands and a pleading expression on his face. Victoria stood on the porch, her body rigid with tension, blocking the door as if physically protecting their children inside. "What's going on here?" Lucas demanded, his voice hard. Thomas turned to face him, and Lucas saw the years hadn't been kind. The man was gaunt and prematurely aged, his clothes shabby and his eyes haunted. "You must be the one who took in my wife and daughter," Thomas said. "I'm Victoria's husband," Lucas corrected coldly. "And Rose's father. You gave up any claim to them when you left them to die in a snowstorm." Thomas flinched. "I made a mistake. I was desperate, not thinking clearly. I've come to make amends to try to rebuild my family." "Your family?" Victoria's voice was sharp as broken glass. "You have no family here, Thomas. You abandoned us. You left your infant daughter to freeze to death." "There's no coming back from that. I have rights," Thomas said, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. "Rose is my daughter by blood. I have a right to see her." Lucas stepped forward, placing himself between Thomas and the house. "You have no rights here. Rose doesn't even remember you. She knows me as her father, and that's how it's going to stay. Victoria is my wife, legally married to me after you abandoned her. You need to leave now and don't come back." Thomas looked from Lucas to Victoria, seeing the united front they presented. "I just want to talk to Rose to explain no." Victoria's voice was absolute. "You don't get to disrupt her life now, Thomas. She's happy and loved and safe. I won't let you take that from her just to ease your own guilt." From inside the house, they heard Rose's voice calling out, asking what was happening. Lucas saw a panic flash across Victoria's face. She didn't want Rose to see this man, to have to deal with this confusion. "Last chance," Lucas said quietly to Thomas. "Leave on your own or I'll make you leave." "Your choice." Something in Lucas's stance or tone must have convinced Thomas he meant business. The man looked defeated, broken. "Tell Rose I'm sorry," he said finally. "Tell her I think about her every day." "No," Victoria said firmly. "I won't burden my daughter with your regrets." "Just go, Thomas. Build a new life somewhere else and leave us in peace." Thomas stood there for another moment, then turned and walked away. They watched him disappear down the road, and only when he was out of sight did Victoria's rigid posture collapse. She sagged against the porch railing, and Lucas was there immediately, pulling her into his arms. "He's gone," Lucas murmured. "He won't be back. I'll make sure of it." "What if he tries to claim Rose legally?" Victoria asked, fear evident in her voice. "What if he goes to the authorities?" "He won't have a case," Lucas assured her. "He abandoned you both. I've legally adopted Rose as my daughter. No court is going to take her from a stable, loving home and give her to a man who left her to die. I promise you, Victoria, I won't let him hurt our family." Victoria clung to him, and Lucas held her tight, rage and protectiveness surging through him. How dare Thomas show up now after all these years and try to disrupt the life they'd built? Rose was his daughter in every way that mattered. He'd been the one to walk her through her first steps, to kiss her scraped knees, to teach her to ride a horse. Biology was nothing compared to that. Inside the house, Rose called out again, and Victoria pulled herself together. "I need to go talk to her to explain what's happening." "We'll do it together," Lucas said. "We're a team, remember?" They went inside to find Rose standing in the main room with Jamie and Lily beside her. The older children looked worried, clearly having heard enough of the confrontation to be upset. "Who was that man?" Rose asked, her eyes wide. Lucas and Victoria exchanged a glance, and then Victoria knelt down to Rose's level. "That was someone from my past, sweetheart, before your papa found us in the snow, before we became a family." "Was he my first papa?" Rose asked, showing a wisdom beyond her years. "The one who left us?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Yes, he was. But Rose, you need to understand something. That man may have been part of bringing you into this world, but your real papa is right here. Lucas is your father in every way that matters." Rose looked at Lucas, and he saw confusion and worry in her expression. He knelt down beside Victoria, putting himself at Rose's eye level. "Rose, I love you as much as I love Jamie and Lily and your little brothers. You're my daughter, and nothing will ever change that. Not blood, not that man showing up here, nothing. Do you understand?" Rose studied his face for a long moment, then threw her arms around his neck. "You're my papa," she said fiercely. "I don't want any other papa but you." Lucas felt tears prick his own eyes as he held his daughter close. "And I don't want any other daughter but you, sweetheart." Jamie, who'd been listening intently, came over and wrapped his arms around both Lucas and Rose. "We're a family," he announced with the certainty of a 7-year-old. "Nobody can change that." "That's right," Victoria said, gathering all three of them into her embrace. "We're a family, and we always will be." They spent the rest of the evening reassuring the children and reinforcing the bonds between them. True to Lucas's prediction, Thomas never returned or made any legal claims. They heard through town gossip that he'd left the area entirely, heading back east. Lucas was relieved but remained vigilant for months afterward, always watching to make sure no threat approached his family. The incident with Thomas, though disturbing, ultimately strengthened the Tanner family's bonds. Rose seemed to understand more clearly than ever that Lucas was her real father, the one who'd chosen to love and care for her. The incident was never spoken of again after those first few days, becoming just another part of their history that they'd overcome together. As the 1880s drew to a close, the Tanner Ranch continued to prosper. Lucas had become one of the most respected horsemen in the region, and their breeding program was producing top-quality animals that commanded good prices. Victoria's sewing business had grown to the point where she had to turn down work, focusing only on the projects that interested her most or paid the best. The children were all thriving. Rose, now 12, was at the top of her class in school and talking about maybe becoming a teacher someday. Jamie had developed into a skilled horseman and rancher, working alongside Lucas every day and showing a natural talent for the work. Lily, at 7, had Victoria's artistic eye and loved to draw and paint. The twins, Matthew and Mark, were 5 years old and full of energy, constantly getting into mischief but bringing laughter and joy to the household. One evening in December of 1889, as Lucas and Victoria sat together after getting all the children to bed, Victoria made an announcement that both surprised and delighted Lucas. "I'm pregnant again," she said, a shy smile on her face. "I know we said we were done after the twins, but apparently life had other plans." Lucas laughed and pulled her into his arms. "Another baby. Victoria, that's wonderful. Are you happy about it?" "I am," Victoria said. "A little nervous. I'm 33 now and this will be our 6th child. But yes, I'm happy. Our children are such blessings, Lucas. Each one of them enriches our lives." "When?" Lucas asked, his hand moving to her stomach. "Summer, I think. July or August." Lucas kissed her tenderly. "We'll make it work just like we always do. And this baby will be just as loved as all the others." The pregnancy progressed normally, though Victoria did find herself more tired than she'd been with previous pregnancies. Lucas insisted she rest more, and Rose and even young Jamie stepped up to help with household tasks and caring for their younger siblings. In late July of 1890, Victoria gave birth to their 6th child, another daughter they named Grace. She was a tiny, delicate baby with a full head of blonde hair and Lucas's gray eyes. The entire family doted on her, from Lucas and Victoria down to 5-year-old Matthew and Mark, who were fascinated by their new sister. "Our family is complete now," Victoria said one evening as she nursed Grace while Lucas sat beside her. "6 beautiful children, a prosperous ranch, and the love of my life beside me. I have everything I ever dreamed of and more." Lucas looked around their home at the cradle where Grace would sleep, at the bedrooms where their other children were settled for the night, at the life they'd built together from nothing. He thought back to that snowy February night 12 years ago when he'd heard a baby crying in the darkness. If someone had told him then that finding that woman and child would lead to all of this, he never would have believed it. "You ever regret it?" he asked Victoria softly. "The path that led you here was hard. Thomas's betrayal, nearly freezing to death, all of it." Victoria looked at him with those warm brown eyes that had captivated him from the beginning. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "Yes, the path was hard, but it led me to you, to this life, to these children. I wouldn't change any of it, Lucas. Every hardship was worth it to get here." "I love you," Lucas said, the words as true now as they'd been the first time he'd said them. "You and all our children. You're my whole world, Victoria, and you're ours," Victoria replied. "Our hero, our home, our heart." The years continued to pass in a blur of work, family life, and gradual prosperity. By 1895, the Tanner Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the region. Lucas had expanded into cattle as well as horses, and they'd purchased an additional 100 acres of adjacent land. They'd also built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, though they kept the original house as a guest cottage and reminder of their humble beginnings. Rose, now 17, was teaching at the Downeyville school and courting a young man named David Wilson, the son of the town's banker. Lucas had vetted the young man thoroughly and found him worthy of his daughter, though he still gave David stern warnings about treating Rose with respect. Jamie, at 16, was practically running the horse operation himself, showing business acumen that impressed even Lucas. He'd started talking about maybe expanding their breeding program, possibly even exhibiting at state fairs. Lily, at 12, had developed into quite the artist. Her drawings and paintings adorned the walls of their home, and Victoria was encouraging her to pursue formal training. The twins, now 10, were in school and showing signs of inheriting their father's size and strength. And little Grace, at 5 years old, was the baby of the family and thoroughly spoiled by her older siblings. Victoria, now 39, had grown even more beautiful with age in Lucas's eyes. She'd put on a little weight over the years, her figure more rounded and womanly, and there were threads of silver in her dark hair. But her eyes still sparkled with life and humor, and Lucas fell in love with her anew every single day. One evening in spring of 1896, Lucas and Victoria took a rare moment to themselves, walking hand in hand through their property at sunset. They walked to the spot where they'd first stood 18 years ago, looking at this land and imagining their future. "We did well," Lucas said, surveying everything they'd built. "Better than I ever imagined we could." "We did," Victoria agreed. "From nothing we built all of this. A home, a business, a family. Lucas, do you remember what you said to me that very first night?" "I said a lot of things that night," Lucas replied, smiling. "You said you'd be my warmth and my family," Victoria reminded him. "And you've been that and so much more. You've been my partner, my lover, my best friend. You've been an incredible father to our children. You've given me a life I never dreamed possible." Lucas pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "And you've given me purpose, Victoria. You saved me from loneliness and showed me what it means to truly live. Everything good in my life came from finding you in that snow." "We saved each other," Victoria said softly. "That's the real truth. Two broken people who found each other and built something beautiful." They stood there as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Behind them, their house glowed with lamplight, and they could hear the distant sounds of their children's voices and laughter. This was home. This was everything. "I'd do it all again," Lucas said quietly. "Every hardship, every challenge, every moment of doubt. I'd do it all again to end up right here with you." "So would I," Victoria agreed. 1,000 times over. They walked back to the house together, ready to join their family for the evening. The house was warm and bright, full of life and love. Rose was helping Lily with some arithmetic while David sat nearby, clearly besotted with Lucas's eldest daughter. Jamie was showing the twins how to mend a piece of tack. Grace was curled up in a chair with a picture book, her blonde curls catching the lamplight. This was the life Lucas and Victoria had built from that desperate moment in the snow 18 years ago. This was the family they'd created through love and determination and faith in each other. As Lucas closed the door behind them and Victoria went to check on supper, he felt profound gratitude for every twist of fate that had brought them to this moment. The abandoned woman in the snow and the lonely logger who'd saved her had become partners in every sense of the word, building a legacy that would extend far beyond themselves. Their children would go on to have children of their own, spreading the Tanner name and the values Lucas and Victoria had instilled in them throughout California and beyond. But that was the future. For now, in this perfect moment, Lucas simply gathered his family around the dinner table, Victoria at his right hand and their children surrounding them. He said grace, thanking God for the abundant blessings they'd received, for the warmth of their home and the love that filled it. As they ate and talked and laughed together, Lucas caught Victoria's eye across the table. She smiled at him, that special smile reserved just for him, and Lucas smiled back. No words were needed. They both knew how lucky they were, how precious this life they'd built together truly was. Outside, night settled over the Sierra Nevada mountains, crisp and clear and beautiful. Inside the Tanner home, all was warm and bright and full of love. And Lucas Tanner, who'd once been a lonely logger convinced he'd never have a family of his own, fell asleep that night with his wife in his arms and the sounds of his children breathing softly throughout their home, completely and utterly content with the life he'd been blessed to live. The promise he'd made on that cold February night in 1878 had been kept in full. He'd been Victoria and Rose's warmth and family, and they'd been his. Together, they'd created something that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of love, compassion, and the courage to reach out and save someone when they need it most. Their story, which had begun with such desperation and fear, had become one of hope, healing, and enduring love. And as the years continued to pass, that love only grew stronger, a beacon of light that guided their family through whatever challenges life might bring. They'd saved each other that snowy night so long ago, and they continued to save each other every single day, through the simple act of choosing love over fear, together over alone, and family over everything else. This was their happily ever after, earned through hardship and treasured beyond measure. And it was more than enough.